Hey everybody, it's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to Napoleon's Marshals Part 3 by Epic History TV. Now I've reacted to the first two episodes of Napoleon's Marshals and the Napoleonic Wars, so if you haven't seen the first two episodes I react to, please go check them out before coming back to this one. And the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go subscribe to Epic History TV, check out all their content. They do amazing historical content, basically what the History Channel should be doing, and it has great narration behind it. So anyway, let's not waste any more time, let's get into this. And oh god, I keep forgetting that bit comes on quite loud.
Terror belli, decus pacis. Terror in war, ornament in peace.
Marshal's baton.
The words inscribed on every French marshal's baton. In France, the title of Marshal or Maréchal goes back at least to the 13th century. It represents the highest possible position of military authority, symbolized by a marshal's baton. The title was abolished during the French Revolution as incompatible with the egalitarian spirit of the age. But in 1804, Napoleon founded a new empire and restored the ancient rank.
So am I.
This is Epic History TV's guide to Napoleon's Marshals.
Oh, I should have said this at the beginning. If I don't say a lot or do much of a reaction, it's because I probably don't know much on the subject, so it's probably information I'm trying to take in, so just a reminder there.
All 26 have been ranked according to our own evaluation of their achievements as marshals, with expert guidance from Lieutenant Colonel Rémy Porte, former chief historian of the French Army. So far, we've met Marshals Pérignon, Brune, Serrurier, Kellerman, Grouchy, Moncey, Poniatowski, Jourdan, Bernadotte,
Can't remember if he said where was Grouchy at the after the Battle of Waterloo. I'll have to re-watch that episode.
Lefebvre, Mortier,
Crown Prince of Sweden, Bernadotte. Or as Napoleon and his supporters call him, a traitor.
And Marmont. First, a big thanks to our video sponsor, Blinkist. Blinkist is here to help solve a big problem for many of
them. Please check out their sponsors.
Free, and you can cancel at any time. Thanks again to Blinkist for sponsoring this video. 13. Marshal Saint-Cyr.
Okay, I was nearly right pronounced that. He is the best man among us in the line of defense, even though I am superior to him in attack. Okay.
Gouvion Saint-Cyr was a gifted student who ran away from a miserable childhood to become an artist. A passionate Republican, he embraced the French Revolution and later volunteered for military service. Though proud and aloof by nature, his Republican politics and sharp intellect ensured he was elected captain of his company. His skill at drawing enemy positions then got him noticed by General Custine, who gave him a job on his staff. During these turbulent early years of the Revolution, Custine was one of several generals who was punished for defeat with a trip to the guillotine. Saint-Cyr's instinctive draw-up intellect ensured he was elected captain of his company. His skill at drawing enemy positions then got him noticed by General Custine, who gave him a job on his staff. During these turbulent early years of the Revolution, Custine was one of several generals who was punished for defeat with a trip to the guillotine. Saint-Cyr's instinctive grasp of warfare brilliant,
who, if anyone doesn't remember, was invented by Dr. Joseph Guillotine.
planning and tactics won him promotion from volunteer to General of Division in 2 years. And even more remarkable,
That's an impressive rank jump, because it takes what, 20, 30 years to get that sort of rank? I could be wrong. Can someone correct me on that one?
remarkable achievement, as he'd had no formal military training. But his cold, analytical approach meant that he was always a respected leader, rather than loved. After 5 years' service with the Army of the Rhine, he was sent to Italy.
The buffer zone.
At the disastrous Battle of Novi, he commanded the French right wing, but skillfully extricated his troops from the debacle.
Wow, impressive.
The next year he was back on the Rhine and won a brilliant victory over the Austrians at Biberach. But a bitter dispute with his commander, General Moreau, encouraged rumours that Saint-Cyr was impossible to work with. Saint-Cyr believed...
What I do like about the Marshals series, it tells you about the battles before, like, you know, the in-between battles of the Napoleonic Wars that you don't hear about in the main series. And it just and I do like how much detail it goes into showing all the Marshals' achievements, and it just makes you appreciate more the hard work Epic History TV puts behind it.
Believed soldiers should not meddle in politics, and did not support Napoleon's seizure of power in 1799. Nor did he show much enthusiasm for Napoleon's decision to crown himself emperor 5 years later. His political views cost him dearly. Saint-Cyr was sidelined for several years, while less able generals were made marshals.
That's...
In 1805...
That, in a figure of speech, must feel like a right kick in the nuts.
He commanded French forces in central Italy.
Okay, that might be an understatement.
But when he was made subordinate to Marshal Massena, a man whom he personally detested...
Which, if you watched in the Napoleonic series, Massena, if I remember rightly, was the one who was called back from the Napoleon's campaign during the Iberian Peninsula War for numerous decisions that cost him his status of marshal. Sorry, I'm really not wording things right this evening. Oops.
He returned to Paris, even when Napoleon threatened to have him shot for desertion.
Wow.
In 1808, Saint-Cyr was given command of a corps for the invasion of Spain, but his failure to take Girona meant he was relieved of command. Leaving in a fury before his replacement, Marshal Augereau, had arrived, he was nearly court-martialed again for desertion. Saint-Cyr's military talent, however, was not in doubt. In 1812, he was recalled for the Russia campaign, with command of 6th Bavarian Corps. His role was to support Marshal Oudinot in guarding the northern flank of the French salient. When Wittgenstein's Russians attacked at Polotsk, Oudinot was wounded, and Saint-Cyr took over command, turning probable...
What he should have said, Oudinot was wounded again. Oop, God, what did I do then? Oh.
Defeat into a brilliant victory. For this achievement, Napoleon awarded Saint-Cyr his Marshal's baton.
Nice.
But 2 months later, at a second Battle of Polotsk, Saint-Cyr was attacked by a larger Russian army, seriously wounded in the foot and forced to pull back. His injury meant he missed the worst horrors of the Russian retreat, but he contracted typhus early in 1813 and was sick for many months.
Oh, God, I can't imagine.
Saint-Cyr returned to the Grande Armée in August, taking command of 14th Corps and the defence of Dresden. Incredibly, this was the first and only time that he worked directly alongside the Emperor, and both soon learned new respect for each other's abilities. Saint-Cyr's skilled defence of Dresden set the stage for Napoleon's great victory there later that month.
Which, if people remember, that they defeated the army of Bohemia, which is what's he called, under Schwarzenberg, because he did not sorry, I don't know why I can't speak properly. He did not follow the Trachenberg plan, which was don't take on the French army when Napoleon's in charge, when Napoleon's taking command.
But Saint-Cyr was incredulous when Napoleon later ordered him to remain in Dresden, while other forces concentrated for the decisive Battle of Leipzig, 60 miles to the west. Napoleon's defeat at Leipzig meant that Saint-Cyr and other garrisons in the east were cut off and had to surrender that autumn. Saint-Cyr took no part in the 100 Days, determined to keep out of France's political disputes. Under the restored monarchy, he served as Minister of War and tried, but failed, to save Marshal Ney from the death penalty. He also struggled to enact military reforms in the face of royalist opposition, eventually resigning in disgust and retiring to his country estate.
I am not going to try and pronounce
Marshal Saint-Cyr remains one of the great what-ifs of the Napoleonic Wars, an extremely able commander sidelined for his politics, who might well have proved one of Napoleon's very best marshals.
Oh, speaking
12.
of Oudinot,
Marshal Oudinot.
a decent fellow but not very bright. Wow.
Nicolas Oudinot ran away to join the army aged 17, but his father dragged him home 3 years later to help run the family business. When the revolution began, he volunteered for the National Guard and was promoted to major. In the wars that followed, he served with the Army of the Rhine, always in the thick of the fighting, rapidly promoted and frequently wounded, a habit for which he became celebrated. In 1799, he was promoted to General of Division and sent to Switzerland to serve as General Massena's new Chief of Staff, a role he performed to perfection, serving
I owe praise to the great Oudinot, insisting me in every
as new Chief of Staff,
second me to perfection.
A role he performed to perfection. Serving with General Bagun in Italy, he led a cavalry charge against an Austrian battery at the Battle of Monzembano, sabring gunners and capturing one cannon himself, a feat for which Napoleon awarded him a Sword of Honour. In 1805, the newly crowned Emperor Napoleon gave Oudinot command of an elite grenadier division formed from the tallest, strongest soldiers in the army. In December that year, at the Battle of Austerlitz, Oudinot insisted on leading the division in person, despite having been shot in the thigh 2 weeks earlier. His grenadiers were kept in reserve for most of the battle, but saw heavy fighting in the latter stages.
It's like a Napoleonic era Richard the Lionheart.
As Napoleon completed
who,
the
if you
destruction,
don't know, was a famous English king who, in the Crusades, often fought at the front lines.
Of the Allied left wing. At the Siege of Danzig in 1807, General Oudinot's division had the unusual distinction of capturing an enemy warship, a British sloop that had run aground trying to resupply the city.
Bad luck.
A month later, at Friedland, Oudinot and his grenadiers were under Marshal Lannes' command and played a crucial role holding up the Russian army, until Napoleon arrived to deal a decisive blow. During the 1809 war with Austria, Oudinot was wounded once more at the Battle of Aspern. When Marshal Lannes died of his wounds, Napoleon chose Oudinot to succeed him as commander of 2nd Corps. He led his new corps with such success at Wagram 6 weeks later that Napoleon attributed victory to Massena and Oudinot. A week later, he became one of 3 new marshals, one for France, one for the army, one for friendship. Oudinot, the army's choice, fearless and much loved, a man whose courage inspired all around him. He later received an additional reward, the title Duke of Reggio. In 1812, Marshal Oudinot led 2nd Corps into Russia, but was wounded again at Polotsk and handed over command to General Saint-Cyr. 10 weeks later, he was back with his corps, marching south to join up with Napoleon's army on its retreat from Moscow. Oudinot's men were shocked when they saw their old comrades from the main column. They looked more like fugitives than soldiers of the Grande Armée. Since Oudinot's 2nd Corps was in better shape than most, it formed the vanguard for the desperate crossing of the Berezina River. But the next day, in bitter fighting to hold the bridge,
because the Grande Armée managed to trick Chichagov, who was up here, to go south here, because Napoleon, I can't remember which corps it was, to fake preparations for a river crossing, which was clever because Chichagov actually he actually took the bait, and while Napoleon's main column was being hunted down by Kutuzov and Wittgenstein.
Bridgehead against the Russians, Oudinot was shot from his saddle. He was carried back to a cottage with a serious gunshot wound, but then he and his party became surrounded by Cossacks. Oudinot asked for his pistols, and from his bed, aiming through an opening opposite, began firing at the Cossacks. They were rescued by friendly troops, just in time. Oudinot was back with the Grande Armée in Germany in 1813. In August, Napoleon ordered him to lead an advance on Berlin, but he was defeated by Bernadotte's Army of the North at Grossbeeren. He then retreated in the wrong direction, causing Napoleon to remark, "It's truly difficult to have less brains than the Duke of Reggio." In Oudinot's defense, he'd probably been given an impossible task. Insufficient men to take on a strong opponent, bad weather, terrible roads, and he himself unwell, possibly not yet recovered from his ordeal in Russia. Napoleon put Oudinot back where he was most effective, leading troops in combat under his close supervision. At Leipzig, he commanded 2 divisions of the Young Guard, engaged in heavy fighting on the southern front for 2 days. Oudinot continued to serve the Emperor courageously and loyally as a corps commander in the final campaign of 1814. But in April, he was one of several marshals to confront Napoleon with the reality of his position and force his abdication. When Napoleon returned from exile in 1815, Oudinot refused to break his new oath to the monarchy, but declared neutrality, telling Napoleon, "Since I shall not serve you, sire, I shall serve no one." He continued to hold senior commands under the Bourbons. By one estimate, Oudinot was wounded 36 times in his military career, more than any other marshal. Here are just 20 that we found details for. A fellow officer who bathed with him at a spa after the war saw the scars on his body and observed he was little more than a colander. Ironically, Oudinot was also one of the longest-lived marshals, dying aged 80 while serving as governor of Les Invalides.
She doesn't care if you forgot to recycle. He doesn't care if you left your reusable shopping bag.
Marshal Victor.
11. Marshal Victor.
Victor was better than one might suppose.
Claude Victor Perrin was an experienced soldier by the time of the French Revolution, a sergeant with 8 years' service in the Grenoble artillery regiment. The Revolutionary Wars brought the opportunity for rapid promotion, and by 1793 he was commanding an infantry battalion at the Siege of Toulon. He led a daring night assault on British defences, alongside the army's artillery chief, a young Major Bonaparte. Both men were wounded, but the attack was a success, and both were quickly promoted to Brigadier General. Victor served under General Bonaparte in Italy, and turned out to be a brilliant brigade commander. In 1800, he distinguished himself at the Battle of Marengo, where his command of the left wing won particular praise from Napoleon.
Victor's commanded the army's left, where he conducted himself with great bravery and intelligence.
But Victor did not hide his disapproval of Napoleon's quest for political power, and as a result, received relatively minor roles under the new regime. In 1802, he was earmarked to lead an expedition to recover the French territory of Louisiana, but it was called off when Napoleon decided instead to sell Louisiana to the United States. Victor and Marshal Lannes were close friends from their days serving together in Italy. In 1806, Lannes persuaded Napoleon to let him have Victor as his new Chief of Staff for 5th Corps. Napoleon agreed, and in October Victor served as Lannes' deputy at the Battle of Jena. Napoleon's earlier misgivings about Victor were now forgotten, and that winter he was given command of the newly formed 10th Corps. But within weeks he was captured by a Prussian patrol, and had to be exchanged for a captured Prussian officer, General von Blücher.
Definitely did not know Blücher
His big
was
break
captured.
came in 1807, stepping in for the wounded Marshal Bernadotte to command 1st Corps at Friedland, where he successfully led a major attack as the Emperor looked on. Promotion to Marshal and the title Duke of Bellumo swiftly followed. In 1808, Marshal Victor and 1st Corps took part in the invasion of Spain, where he'd be posted for the next 3 years. Victor's record in Spain was better than most, but like others, he seemed more interested in personal glory and rewards than in cooperating with fellow commanders. In 1809, at Medellin, he inflicted a crushing defeat on General Cuesta's Spanish army. 4 months later, his bold night attack on the British at Talavera came tantalizingly close to success. He was furious the next day when King Joseph and Marshal Jourdan refused to support fresh attacks, and instead ordered a cautious withdrawal. The next year, Victor besieged the Spanish port of Cadiz. It proved a lengthy, futile operation, devoid of glory, and saw his troops defeated by an Allied sortie at the Battle of Barossa. In 1812, Victor was recalled from Spain for the invasion of Russia. His 9th Corps was held in reserve for most of the campaign, though his troops were kept busy defending depots and convoys from Cossack raids. That autumn, his corps attempted to cover the main army's retreat from Moscow. The greatest crisis of the retreat came at the Berezina River. As the remnants of the Grande Armée began crossing over 2 improvised bridges, Victor's 9th Corps was ordered to form the rearguard. Though heavily outnumbered, Victor skillfully handled his French and German troops, holding the Russians at bay as the army made its escape. He then marched his surviving troops over the bridges in good order, a courageous performance in desperate circumstances. In Germany in 1813, Victor commanded 2nd Corps and led the attack in Napoleon's last great victory at Dresden. His corps was in heavy fighting again at Leipzig 2 months later. Victor continued to serve at the Emperor's side in the defense of France in 1814. By now, like many comrades, he must have been close to physical and psychological exhaustion. Regardless, during the Battle of Montereau, Napoleon let fly at him for failing to get his troops into position, and blamed him for the Allies' escape. Victor was relieved of command, but angry and humiliated at what he considered his unfair dismissal, he told the Emperor, Marshal Victor has not forgotten his old trade. I will shoulder a musket and take my place in the guard. Moved by this response, Napoleon relented and gave Victor command of a corps of young guard. 2 weeks later, he was badly wounded at the Battle of Craon and took no further part in the war. A month later, Napoleon abdicated, and Victor switched his loyalty to the Bourbon monarchy with surprising zeal. He led an investigation into former comrades who'd supported Napoleon during the 100 Days, and was one of only 2 active marshals to vote for the death penalty for Marshal Ney, a decision he later claimed to regret. Victor later served as Minister of War, but retired from public life in 1830, following the overthrow of the Bourbon monarchy.
Go!
10.
Murat.
Marshal Murat.
I cannot conceive how so brave a man could be so unreliable. He was only brave when facing the enemy. In council, he was a fool with no judgment. Another marshal that would betray Napoleon in the end.
Joachim Murat, the son of an innkeeper, was destined for a career in the church, but dropped out of college and joined a cavalry regiment instead.
I just had a bit of a brain fart. I thought that said pizza. I am such a muppet sometimes.
To his immense frustration, he saw little action in the early years of the Revolutionary Wars, being stuck with staff and training roles. But in 1795, while stationed in Paris with the 21st Chasseurs, fate intervened. A young general, Napoleon Bonaparte, had been put in charge of the defense of the National Convention. With a mob poised to storm the building, he ordered Captain Murat to bring him cannons, which he did, racing the guns through the city streets, allowing Napoleon to mow down the mob with a famous whiff of grape shot.
Yeah, more like a whiff. It was more like a blizzard of grape shot.
Napoleon was hailed as the saviour of the government and rewarded with command of the army of Italy. Murat was promoted colonel and went with him as his new aide-de-camp. He soon made a name for himself as a bold and brilliant leader of cavalry, while his 6-foot height, curly locks and love of women ensured fame as France's foremost beau sabreur.
The dashing swordsman.
In 1798, Murat joined Napoleon's expedition to Egypt. At the Battle of Abu Qir, his flanking charge broke the enemy, and Murat personally took the Ottoman commander prisoner, despite being shot in the jaw, a wound which, to his immense relief, did not ruin his looks.
Wow.
Back in Paris, Napoleon launched his coup d'etat to seize political power. When he got a hostile reception from the Council of 500, it was Murat who saved the day, leading troops in to clear the chamber, shouting, "Citizens, you have been dissolved," before adding something a bit more coarse. His place at the future emperor's side was further assured when he married Napoleon's youngest sister, Caroline, in 1800. Later that year, he commanded the French cavalry reserve at Marengo and helped Napoleon to win a decisive victory over the Austrians. When Napoleon established his empire in 1804, Murat became a marshal, second in seniority only to Berthier. He'd later also received the title Prince of the Empire and the rank of Grand Admiral. In the 1805 campaign, he commanded Napoleon's cavalry reserve, his excellent reconnaissance and diversions proving crucial in the encirclement of General Mack's Austrian army at Ulm. 3 weeks later, Murat and Marshal Lannes, who normally couldn't stand each other, together bluffed an Austrian commander into surrendering a vital bridge by persuading him that an armistice had been signed when it hadn't. It was a bold stunt, but overall Napoleon was not impressed by Murat's pursuit of the enemy. "I cannot approve your manner of march. You go on like a stunned fool, taking not the least notice of my orders." Yet in battle, Murat remained a brilliant and inspiring leader, as demonstrated at Austerlitz, and the next year at Jena, where he led the decisive charge, wielding only his riding crop. The next year, at Eylau, with the Russians poised to break through his centre, Napoleon ordered Murat to lead a mass cavalry charge.
Sorry for the yawning, but it's like quarter to midnight when I'm recording this.
Charge straight at the enemy. Murat's men succeeded and saved the army from disaster, though at a terrible price in men and horses. Napoleon had rewarded Murat
Okay.
in 1806 by making him sovereign prince of the Grand Duchy of Berg.
Took the video off the screen.
In 1808, he sent Murat to Spain to act as his representative. Spain was still a French ally, but in May, Napoleon's heavy-handed meddling in Spanish affairs triggered a ferocious backlash. Madrid rose up against the French garrison, and Murat's troops fought back with brutal force, killing around
More like murdering.
200, executing
Well,
300
murdering.
more. When Napoleon deposed Spain's Bourbon monarchy, Murat hoped he'd be made the new king of Spain. But that title went to Napoleon's brother, Joseph. Murat instead received the throne of Naples. If it felt like second prize, it wasn't bad going for an innkeeper's son, college dropout, and ex-cavalry
Jumped
trooper.
straight to the monarchy of Naples.
Napoleon expected Murat to merely represent his interests in Naples, but Murat had other ideas. He reformed the Neapolitan army, equipping it with splendid new uniforms, and turned a blind eye to smuggling, which undermined Napoleon's economic war against Britain, the so-called Continental System. Relations between Murat and the Emperor became strained. But when Napoleon began planning to invade Russia in 1812, only Murat would do to lead his cavalry. Their differences were put to one side. Murat took command of 4 cavalry corps and became Napoleon's second-in-command. During the advance into Russia, Murat's cavalry faced a difficult and frustrating task, trying to locate the enemy in a vast landscape. Horses died in their thousands from poor fodder and exhaustion, and they faced a dangerous and wily opponent in Russia's Cossacks. Murat, always riding with the advance guard, was so fearless and conspicuous in his extravagant uniforms that the Cossacks came to admire him, calling out "Ura, Murat!" whenever they saw him, and hoped to capture him alive if possible.
Yeah, because they saw him as a kindred spirit for his bravery. That must make you one hell of a soldier if your enemy sees you as a kindred spirit.
Murat was among those who tried to persuade Napoleon to halt the advance at Smolensk, but was ignored.
They dirt my life.
At the great clash between the French and Russian armies at Borodino, Murat was at his best, directing a series of attacks on the Russian earthworks, always where the action was hottest, inspiring all with his courage. Murat remained with the army during the retreat from Moscow, though his magnificent cavalry had virtually ceased to exist. One eyewitness noted that throughout the ordeal, he never neglected his appearance. Even at the Berezina he looked splendid, in an open-necked shirt, velvet cloak, a white feather in his cap.
So, all in all, a man with style.
When Napoleon left the army to return to Paris, he gave command to Marshal Murat. But Murat, now primarily concerned with hanging on to his kingdom, left the army a month later and returned to Naples, where he opened secret negotiations with the coalition. He offered to join the war against Napoleon if the other powers would let him keep his crown. But he received only a lukewarm response. So in 1813, when Napoleon asked Murat to join him in Germany to fight for their thrones together, he answered the call. Murat had become increasingly difficult to work with, oversensitive about his royal status, prone to tantrums, but in battle as fearless as ever. At Dresden, his charge through rain and mud shattered the Austrian left wing and paved the way for victory. But then at Liebert-Volkwitz, he showed his limitations when not under Napoleon's direct command, getting drawn into a major and unnecessary cavalry battle with coalition forces, and twice nearly being captured himself. 2 days later, at the Battle of Leipzig, he led another of history's great cavalry charges, coming close to breaking the enemy's centre, and even capturing the Allied monarchs. But it was not to be. The Battle of the Nations ended in a disastrous defeat. As Napoleon retreated to the French frontier, Murat informed the Emperor that he was leaving for Naples, promising to raise fresh troops. Murat and Napoleon would never meet again. 3 months later, the King of Naples had cut a deal with the coalition and switched sides. So long as it was possible for me to believe that the Emperor Napoleon was fighting to bring peace and glory to France, I fought loyally at his side, Murat declared. But now I know that the Emperor's sole desire is war. However, Murat's commitment to the Sixth Coalition was distinctly half-hearted. His army marched against Eugene's forces in northern Italy, but had done no actual fighting before news arrived of Napoleon's abdication. Murat then began to suspect what had been obvious to Napoleon at least. The coalition was not going to honour its promise, and Murat would be next to lose his throne. So, in 1815, encouraged by news of Napoleon's return from exile, Murat marched north against the Austrians, proclaiming a war for Italian freedom and independence. Just 7 weeks later, his campaign ended in defeat at the Battle of Tolentino. With the British and Austrians closing in, Murat became a hunted fugitive. He sailed to France, but Napoleon had not forgiven his betrayal and refused to see him. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, he fled to Corsica, gathered a small band of volunteers and returned to Italy in a hopelessly doomed attempt to start a revolution and reclaim his throne. Chased by a mob and arrested on the beach, Murat was sentenced to death by the restored Bourbon monarchy of Naples. He met his end with his usual courage, telling the firing squad, "If you wish to spare me, aim at the heart," then gave the order to fire himself. Murat is rightly remembered as one of the great battlefield cavalry commanders of history. Inspirational, fearless, with brilliant tactical instinct. But outside of combat, he was, in Napoleon's estimation, a very poor general. He always waged war without maps. Worse, when the conflict turned against France, he allowed self-interest and vanity to prevail over loyalty to the emperor. As Napoleon's chief of staff, Marshal Berthier, once told him, "You're only a king by the grace of Napoleon and French blood. It's black ingratitude that's blinding you." Sancerre, Oudinot, Victor, Murat. 17 down, 9 to go. Join us for part 4, when we'll continue the countdown. Coming soon.
And that'll do it.
Thanks again.
Another interesting video from Epic History TV, so definitely be looking forward to part 4. So So anyway, if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.